All right, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Welcome to Green Apple Books. I'm Brennan McHugh. I am a bookseller here. I'm really excited to welcome Jennifer's Tseng and Katie Peterson tonight. We can go ahead and do a round of applause. Yes. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And we're going to be hearing them read and speak from about their collections. Jennifer's Thank You for Letting Us Know You Are Alive and Katie's Fog and Smoke. That will be followed by a Q&A, and both of them will be signing their books afterwards. Before I introduce them, I want to first thank you for joining us in person as well as our online audience. We are broadcasting from San Francisco, and we are on unceded Ramaytush Ohlone land, and I hope you join us in our pledge to turn land acknowledgement into action and donate either your time or monetary means to an Indigenous organization every time you hear a land acknowledgement. And we have a QR code at the back desk near where the books are featured that can tell you more all about it. Now I have brief business. So now is a great time to silence your phone if you have not already done so. But there's a twist. You can still take photos and post it all over Instagram and tag them if they have Instagram. I don't know, I'll find out afterwards. And it's encouraged. Also, do check out our full event calendar on our website. We have had some really good events in the past couple of weeks, and then we have some more great ones coming up in June and July as well. The restroom is behind us, and it's only available after the event for obvious reasons. So don't try to do that. Also, don't try to answer your phones during the events that happens. A special note, when you buy books from us, you are not just supporting independent bookstores, but also supporting writers like these two, who put so much work into their books. And you also get a book, which is the best part. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce the authors in the order of their reading. And also, like, if I don't do it right, you can also read however you want because they're great, right? Okay. So, Katie Peterson is the author of poetry collections This One Tree, Permission, The Accounts, which was the winner of a UNT Roca Prize, and A Piece of Good News. She lives in California and teaches at University of California, Davis. Jennifer's Son is an assistant professor of literature and creative writing at UC Santa Cruz. She's the author of 2 previous full-length poetry collections, The Man with My Face and Red Flower, White Flower. Her flash fiction collection, The Passion of Wu and Is Old, was a Firecracker Award finalist and winner of an Eric Hoffer Book Award. And her novel Mayumi in the Sea of Happiness was shortlisted for the Penn Robert Bingham Prize for Debut Fiction and the New England Book Award. And let's give a big hand to both of them again, and I'm going to go away and sit in the back. And yeah, welcome. Congrats. Let's do it.
Does it matter which side? I'll sit
No,
by the
doesn't matter.
I'll sit on the side with
How's that? Can you hear it?
Yeah.
The mother. Watching a good father with his daughter can heal a person. It is like water. To see them together on the beach with a yellow bucket between them, and she digs a hole big enough to bury his feet up to the ankles and leave him smiling to stay where she puts him, even pulling out his phone to take a picture of her running away toward the changing margin of the lake, testing whether he could get out and grab her if she stumbled in the water, whether his feet have been truly trapped by her decisions, or whether her seriousness can't yet do to sand what she has done of late to sentences, exactly what she wants. Watching her refute the water with ankles I believe mine still resemble, I think into the stories I can't tell her about the summer I spent in a state I never returned to with a man who didn't think the wildfires should keep us from pleasure. Years before my father wished he never taught me to take pictures since he felt my sunsets imprecise, telling me just take the people out, at least what I can't tell her now. I am so good at watching the earth. My judgment comes in secret. It remains as fair as nature, and nature is the force that makes all seasons end when they should. I'm really happy to be reading some poems from this book, Fog and Smoke, with my friend, the brilliant Jennifer Tseng, who can write anything in any genre on any coast. And that is only one of her great merits. She has many others, like her sense of humor and her understanding of the family, which she shows in her wonderful new book. And I want to thank you all for coming too, and thank the bookstore for having us. This book I wrote, Fog and Smoke, is about the weather. The natural weather, the fog that you know if you live in the city, and the smoke, the unnatural weather that comes and goes as we have made it because of the world we've made. And in these weather elements, people in this book are doing their thing. And I want to read some poems from the third section, which is really about family. And as I was reading that poem, I was thinking about this image of the little girl running away from the father. And in a way, I think it's a wonderful image of love, the image of running away from somebody. And another thing that runs away is the smoke, actually. So the next poem takes place in the middle of the pandemic, during one of those pieces of the pandemic where we all knew what to do, but we weren't all necessarily doing it the way we were told. Smoke. Dylan came by and we sat unmasked. We had seen enough of each other all summer. We were almost quarantining together. And he'd been tested twice in the last month, but afterward I took a shower and cried. Phyllis didn't go for a walk. Her lungs are 90. She's not an idiot, but her daughter Paisha did. Paisha once took pictures of clandestine midwives in the 60s illegally watching over the births of children. They kept our children inside before lunch, but after that the air seemed fine, though Luna's mother said she coughed at night, and Paloma herself, all of 2, told me at pickup she smelled like camping. Margaret said it wasn't so bad yesterday in the Central Valley, where it is generally much worse, but today it was no good, and she was crying, not feeling tears, but the other kind, the kind your body makes when it's wise. Young and Emily are fine. Thank you for writing to ask me about them, dead mother. I have heard the whole world is now getting letters from the dead. Actual letters addressed to them in human envelopes with stamps of American rivers delivered through the mail. Since the post office is about to die, the land of the dead, its government, have decided for now to take it over, that they could do a better job than we could. And I agree. The letter I received from you, written in a splendid hand on pink paper with a decal edge, looked just like the year that you were born, when warships docked in San Francisco Bay and ordinary city blocks had wardens and margarine was what you ate on bread. And since we cannot send a letter back because your invisible address flummoxes our advanced forensics, I will write this and burn it in a bowl secretly inside my house, since there are city rules about flames at a time like this. If you won't be reached by words, by smoke, my love will reach you with our story. One of the things that the last section of this book tests out is what a family is and whether it can be extended. In a moment of extreme sincerity I do not regret, but which I'm glad didn't result in the title of this book, I thought I would call it The Human Family. And in the first draft of the book, I played around with a lot of poems with the title that had the word family in it. Like many of the poems in the book, these extensions got reduced to something more crystalline without as much commentary and variation. This is one of these poems. If you've been haunted by the news lately, and who hasn't, this poem may have something to say to you. Family. All I knew is that I would not let them die alone. The images, The image of the father with his daughter pulled into his shirt, her head tucked into his armpit, like a lamb in a description of a shepherd in a novel by Thomas Hardy, arms around each other so they would not be separated if they drowned. But then they drowned. On June 5th, the poet Major Jackson chose this poem for a little commentary on the wonderful podcast, The Slowdown. And I want to just direct you there and encourage you to listen to it because he reads the poem about as well as I do. Americans. He lost his job. He didn't know what to say to his family, so he sat in the train station all afternoon and told each person waiting a different story. She made a quilt for her baby. She had to sell it for money, and since it worked the first time, she did it again. Now she sells everything she makes to other people. He didn't have enough to bring his parents over, so they died in a place where he could never visit them. He had to marry her to keep her here. Rain, snow on the monument to the boats that settled the fishing town on the northern spit in a state most of us will never visit. More snow on that pass where people died when they had to eat pine branches than each other. Enough wind to make the government warn us. She grew up on that land but never owned it. He owned it years ago and lost it in a game. She didn't grow up here, but she planted poppies, wild iris, suncups, lupins, those native plants you see. She planted them all. Seeds she ordered from another state. She had an idea the soil could be reminded, not that soil has ever lived for pleasure. She thought she could make an agreement with it. He couldn't help his children with their homework. She never had children, only ideas. Together, the two of them built this house, and together let it rot in rain and weather. Were they taking their loneliness out on each other? Did they simply not understand abundance the way in which it asks you to quit asking? He loved his partner's dogs more than his partner, and they were very beautiful. Who could blame him? A silver gray sheepdog and a spotted heeler. It made her so mad when he went to that church she quit getting up in the morning. She decided that her world should just be night. When they were in public, he said, "Only speak English." The boats they used to own ended up firewood. What beautiful fires our houses made that winter. So I've been married to a man for like 10 years, and I only ever wrote him one love poem. And it's in this book, and he's not even the main character in it. But it was written for him. And the place where I live in the Berkeley Hills is part of these terrains in California we call the wildland-urban interface, places where a place of inhabitation and a place that's wild are so close to each other they're interspersed. There's another name for it when two biological zones creep up on each other called ecotone, I think. But a lot of this book has to do with those threshold spaces and states, and this one has as its central character one of the natural beings that you live with if you live in the wildland-urban interface. The deer in fire season. It isn't love that makes them come nestle each other under the liquid amber after they eat all the ivy dahlias in the stalk. The doe only half naps, eyes half open, trained on threats. She fogs her sight to resemble its lack, convincing others she doesn't pay attention the exact way I endure regrets, smoke screening deeper fears. Neither is the cause of their loyalty to this location fear, nor is it hunger. It is nothing particular to our plot. Husband, you should not be surprised. I've seen you as particular at a restaurant early in our caring for each other, choosy over a table in the sun. I live with your distastes. Cilantro, small talk, slapstick. I appreciate what you tolerate. Humiliation on the human level, sleepless nights. I know how immovable you are. So chase the mother with your camera. It is you who instructed me the leisure of animals finds equivalence only in art. See, she lets her children escape first. She wants to stall us. So let us be still humans who can lose track of time. Watch her leg. It's like a lower limb of eucalyptus pushing winter. It looks like tinder. Thanks.
I like that. It's gonna be great.
Is that okay? Good. It's a little bit awkward for me, honestly. So thank you, all of you, all 8 of you for being here. And thank you, Brendan and Carr and Green Apple. And Katie, thank you so much. You know, I had a really difficult year, and then Katie's book arrived at my house, and I felt accompanied by it. It's just a book that I feel like even if a stranger had written it, I would have felt like someone was keeping me company. And it meant so much to me. All right, so these poems, I think I need this to be closer so that I don't sit so straight. These poems were made with lines from my late father's English letters, which he wrote to me over a period of a little over 20 years. And so his lines function as titles and then also mingle with my lines throughout the poem. I always thought that when I made this book that it would be a way of communing with him. But almost as soon as I started, I realized that we would also be arguing. So this phrase, "not so dear Jenny," comes from one of his letters that he wrote to me when he was very angry with me. I don't know if it matters. All right, "not so dear Jenny. We sew a knot to hold the thing that's dear to us. Ropes that lashed your trunk to the mast, cord that fastened your briefcase to the bicycle, thread at the end of the seam down the back of my dress. 11 letters to confess your love, 3 more to negate it. Not so, dear Jenny, not so, that not. Our fear, so dear, is its undoing." One of the things that I struggled with when I was making this book is that my father was a different person inside his letters than he was outside his letters. There were things that he wrote in his letters that he would never have said to us in real life, and things that he said to us in real life that he would never dare record in a letter. So I have a special fondness for this next line because it's something that he would utter in both realms often after he and our mother divorced. But we two can never divorce each other. The longing to marry your father, expressed in 2 languages, doubles the feeling. The ocean between you elongates the longing. As a child, I wanted to go to the pyramids, to Egypt, to outer space. Without knowing, I was waiting. I waited and waited. There was no proposal. He married someone else, someone who smiled a lot, whose scorn was palpable. When he died, she vanished. Every time he said, "We two can never divorce each other," I wanted to leave him. Every time he said, "We two can never divorce each other," I wanted to stay with him forever. I looked for someone else to marry. I developed a fondness for people who pretended to be my father. It was a very exciting time. Some of my best fathers were women. In the end, I married a replica of my sister. If he wasn't going to marry me, I wasn't going to marry him either. Every night, I sleep in the arms of my child while he sleeps in his grave. But we two can never divorce each other. So our father was very ambitious, very accomplished. He was a Superior Court judge in Taiwan and a professor of electronic engineering here in California. So he had high expectations of himself and also of us. And in a way it was great because, you know, the height of his expectations of us it was really equal to his belief in our ability to do anything. Like, we could do anything. We could win the Nobel Prize. We could be president. It was really only oppressive sometimes when he, in the context of comparing us to other people. One of the clearest memories I have of the house of my childhood is this newspaper article that our father, you know, he cut it out of the newspaper and taped it to the refrigerator about this 6-year-old boy who had just graduated from college. Just a little reminder of what's possible. Okay. None of the Literature Nobel Prize winners I know of were graduated from the most prestigious universities. None. Comfort or come to the fort for your punishment. Bend down on the common ground of our lousy origins to be whipped. Your honor, no bell will ring when I prize you out of the frozen ground. It's not hot as hell in California, but you're there, putting down roots. You winners are underfoot, graduated from the most prestigious universal. Me, I'm walking, crushing leaves with my boots, just another loser, breathing air. So a few of the poems in the book are made solely with his lines, and this is one of them. Dear Monkey Number 1, I am your father and you are my daughter. Please keep this in mind as you read. Please be patient. This is not a logically developed letter. I never had a feeling of completion. I thought I would rearrange what I wrote at the end, but time is running out. I am terribly sorry for failing to be your role model. I believe you two deserve someone better. I have been a total failure as a father. So many of the letters that my father wrote to me were when I was at writing residencies. I kept going places, I kept trying to escape him, but he always found me. No matter where I went, he always wrote me letters. And sometimes I cared so much about what he thought that I couldn't listen to what he had to say. So I can't tell you how much I used to dread his letters. And I'm so lucky to have them. I never read one word Toni Morrison wrote. There are many ways to love a person. In 1993, he wrote the words Toni and Morrison in a letter to me. I was at a residency. The same prize that ennobled her enabled him to see 12 letters differently. The word Nobel, so noble, it kept ringing in his ears. Years before the prize, before her nobility in the world's eyes, my father was the person who heard the name Toni Morrison and asked, "Who's he?" He never read one word Toni Morrison wrote. After the prize, he never did either, but the words Toni and Morrison entered his lexicon. He flexed the 17 muscles in his hand to make 12 letters of the English alphabet occur in a particular sequence. Her name became our cryptonym, a silent hymn we wrote to signal allegiance, a code we sent back and forth during a war that was otherwise raging. I was living alone in the woods of Texas, walking the red dirt roads so reminiscent of past wars. People stared at me as if I were the enemy. Most had only seen a face like mine on TV. One man had seen me years before in a jungle. I was a trigger for the time he pulled a trigger and I died. There are many ways to kill a person. At the nearest store, I asked for tortillas. None of the clerks knew what they were. Texas is big enough to hold most of Vietnam, Cambodia, and a large chunk of Thailand. There are many ways to live there. I went back to the cabin and wrote Toni Morrison a letter. Imagine the hundreds of young women living in dangerous territories who must have done the same. An army of us writing to her asking, what are the possibilities for me behind all these trees? There are many ways to ask a question. One day, her name in his envelope, written in his ink, came back to me. There are many ways to answer. All right, so this poem is a response to 2 questions that my father asked. Did you have a dream? If you don't, why not have one now? And to the following line, I have a strong mixed feeling regarding myself. My dream is a day that never ends. In the late afternoon, I mix a strong drink of your feelings. I sip your sadness, your happiness, your ecstasy, your boredom. I taste your contradictions. I swill your eternities around in my mouth with my tongue. I eat a few peanuts lightly roasted in sugar and salt. My dream is to see you pause before a shop window and regard yourself, then run home to write me a letter regarding us. In my dream, I drink your self-regard, your frightened expression in the glass. While I sip, you write me a letter. While you write, I lick the salt and sugar off my fingertips. I never finish my drink. You never finish the letter. The day never ends. So sometimes you don't realize that a story is funny or sad or angry until you write it down, or until someone reads it or hears you read it. And something like that happens with this last poem. I sometimes cry when I read it, and people sometimes laugh when they hear me read it. It's okay for you to laugh even if I'm crying. That's just life. Please ask your mother one more time to drop the warrant for my arrest. I'm 15. In a year, someone will climb through my window and kiss every soft part of me. Nights I'll lie in the dark listening. Crickets will sing in the white star jasmine. Sparrows will sleep in the Valencia tree, and I'll wait awake for the knock on the glass that will change everything. But on the day I receive your letter, I'm 15. I like to run. I like to speak French. I like to lie on the sand in the sun. These are things I'd rather do. You are living alone in a strange place, writing to me. You have no one else. You say please, something you never say in real life. something you never say outside your letters. I'm inside your letters. The sentence is a plea and a command. Although you are desperate, you are still my father. You say one more time as if I've already tried and have failed. I've forgotten what I did or didn't do. I can't remember 15. I remember 16. Those kisses arrest every moment of my experience in a body that eats and cries out and has memories and warrants your attention. Does it matter now if I asked her? I'm asking you one more time to drop it. I promise you won't go to jail. You can visit any time of the year. Qingzuo, Qingjin, Qingzuo. Chinese people are making me nervous. Have some peanuts. Have some tea. Look, your letters are on the table. Your photos in the album for us to admire. See, we're talking. Say anything you want. There's nothing to fear. No one will know you're here. Thank you. We can answer questions if you want. I read the 2 Chinese lines in the reverse order just because I was nervous that someone might know Chinese. And I do know Annabelle has a little mention. Are there any questions?
But it could have been that way.
True, but you would go in before you sit down though, right? But thank you.
I have a question.
Both of your books are thematic. Is that something that you usually do, or do you write like a collection all at once thematically, or do you sort of scatter them and then collect them? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I do think that the thematic collection and or like a collection that has a premise has kind of become the way people do it. I never used to do that. I remember when I gave my previous book, Red Flower, White Flower, to someone, and I was struggling with like, well, how should I structure this? What order should it be? And she said, I think that you could throw these poems up in the air and wherever they landed would be okay. That's usually, I think, how I used to write, but there was something about this book that was just, I was just obsessed with these letters, and that's all the book is about. I don't know about you.
I wrote the poems in this book poem by poem, and then they collected after. In the original draft of this book, there was another section in prose that was a diary I wrote during the pandemic of visiting the people that I visited under those conditions. It was less about those conditions than it was about the strange families and relations I made during the pandemic. And I mention it because of all the books I've ever written, this is the one where the most number of alternate drafts of the book exist in my head that didn't get published as this book called Fog and Smoke. And I wrote sort of a group of poems right after Trump was elected. And then I wrote a number of poems through the smoke events. And then right after the pandemic, I wrote the fog poem. And so in a way, the order of the book is the reverse order in a sense too. So that's all a way of saying the theme came later, and the collection through the theme helped me point the reader and point myself towards the material conditions that allowed the emotions to happen within the poem, as opposed to asking the reader to just embed themselves in the emotional thing without any drama in a way. I think calling it Fog and Smoke and giving it that carapace let some of those tougher feelings fall more gently in the book. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wake up in the morning and I don't want to write a book of poems. I want to write a poem. Yeah.
maybe I have a follow-up to that theme. I'm curious, Katie, and this might apply to Jennifer too eventually, but I guess starting with Katie, how did you set out at sort of the onset of your creation of this book? Was it like you were thinking of it diaristically, or like, I'm gonna write first person stuff? I'm thinking about the first person versus the way the book kind of ended up, which is there's not a lot that I can tell with first person really going on. It sort of gets set into narrative, and it feels like the wisdom is kind of, the poetic wisdom is transcendent to the collective human experience. So maybe just a little bit about how you were viewing the process of doing it, how you're viewing the I. How much did you want the I to come into it? And I don't know, maybe I can adapt that question for you, Jennifer, too, but let's start with that.
In Jennifer's poems, to read her first, there's a conversation between the you and the I happening in an ideal world. It's a conversation that can't happen in the world, that only can happen within the poem. And I was thinking about that as Jennifer was reading, that there are these conversations we have with ourselves in poems, the argument with the self or the argument with God, that you can't have in the world. And I think about poetry, there are issues in which I'm a purist. One of them is I think poetic speech is reserved for those conversations. If there's a conversation in a poem you can have with a person, then you should probably pick up the phone. You know, the poem is for something else. And so the question is about what you do with the first person, something I've always been interested in because, you know, in a way, I think I was raised in a family where I was told you shouldn't call attention to yourself. Well, at the same time, every large personality named Sullivan and Peterson I knew was calling attention to themselves. And that contradiction that some of us in our, you know, American microclimates of family feel between asserting yourself in the good old American way and deriding your first person because that's the humble and kind of, you know, vaguely white Christian thing to do is like one of the primary facts of how I came into language. So of course I got interested in Emily Dickinson because that's a first person that's always negating itself in some way. When I went to write this book, I was reading and teaching a lot of philosophy, mainly Plato and Nietzsche, and I was interested in aphoristic wisdom and how it sits in a poem, how it sits there for anyone to pick it up and say it and have it. And I wanted all the people in the book to orbit around these pieces of wisdom that are just there for anyone to kind of pick up and use and change. And so I think it's not native to me to want to write a first person poem. I always want to write in the you, or sometimes lately in the we. Those seem to me like protective cloaks against both the swagger and the responsibility of speaking in the first person.
Maybe it has something to do with how you dealt with the I, given that this was a very personal thing. Were you starting to set it into a fictionalized I, or was it more like a direct?
It's pretty direct. I mean, an example of what would happen to me when I was working with these letters, eventually I had to limit myself to only reading 2 letters a day because I could just fall into the rabbit hole of his letters. But I had worked on the book in the morning, and then in the evening I went to dinner with my daughter and her grandmother. And I said to them, I started saying, oh my gosh, my dad said the funny, like I was about to say, he said the funniest thing this morning, and then caught myself and realized, oh, actually, he didn't say that, but it was me having conversations with him. And so, I mean, that is another thing that poetry is reserved for, talking to the dead. But then, and also the luxury of having his letters and really getting to hear him again, or to see his handwriting.
Does that mean that if there's no poetry, then you can't completely live your life, that you're missing something that only poetry can experience?
I, I was going to tease you and say, yeah, you have to be a poet in order to do this. No, I maybe for me, but I think everyone has a way of, I think poetry is part of the structure of the world, and that every person has a different way of being poetic and having poetic conversations. But I do think for me, when I'm in crisis, it's where I go and it's what helps me. Whether that's because something's emotionally overwhelming, or if there's something that's so many layered and complicated that I need to just look at the little pieces, almost like under a microscope, to help me understand and experience.
I was thinking, I write poetry about things I don't understand. And there's one perspective, which is that things you don't understand can get understood if you write about them. And there's another perspective, which is that you're still probably not going to understand that thing. But what you've done is you've come closer to the part of you that's related to it, to that thing that you can't understand. That's probably the second thing that I think. I like that when you talked about the letters, the rabbit hole you talked about, right? So it wasn't a process where you thought you were going to get over it, right? Maybe you've gotten over something, but the poem isn't about the completed task. It's about the continuous task and a participation of everybody in that task. It's the reason why poetry loves to talk about mourning and desire. So your question was, does it mean if there's no poetry, there are things that we can't do in our lives? I think that when you think about poetry as you expand the definition to visual art and music, certain things in the natural world and the way that we understand them, poetry is the structure of the world. The answer to your question is yes, if there's no poetry, we can't live our lives.
Well, engagement is crucial to life.
I think that my question too, I was almost in the opposite position to Katie's, because I think growing up with my father, he was the one who had control of the narrative. And so this was my chance to speak. So yeah, the I is definitely not fiction.
For immigrants, I feel like personally, it is true, like sort of the immutable hierarchy of family is in contrast to kind of the reality of the child being the expert in the culture, right? And so those two, it's that argument you were talking about. That's what I'm feeling that it comes from.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, who's in charge here? Who's the expert? Who knows more? Who can write? Who can use this language?
Absolutely. Any other questions?
I should buy. I want to ask you about the longing of a child, the longing of 15 versus the longing of now, the longing of you now writing the book versus the longing you remember from being the child and being 15 the year you forget, and 16 the year you remember. Do you think they're different? Do you think the way that we have longing changes when we're older than when we're younger? Can you remember?
It's funny, I don't know if I can remember. Even when I think about the poem and what it describes, what I remember isn't really the feeling. I remember the sensual details. Like I remember opening the window. I remember waiting for the knock on the glass. I remember what happened afterward. I don't, it's hard to remember the feeling.
will buy a book. It's wonderful bookstore.
Why don't we give her a round of applause? So thank you so much for coming. I loved that conversation. I love the reading. I love the poems. It was so fantastic. There are copies available at the front registers up there. Please buy them, and these two will sign copies for you if you have not gotten it signed yet. And I think because it's a smaller crowd, you can just kind of go up to them individually if you want to do that. Feel free to like hang out and chat, look around. Thank you so much for coming. I hope you come again to other events. And thank you again to Katie and Jennifer. It was so nice to hear both of your work being read out loud. And that's it. One more round of applause for both of them.